Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah wa rabbil alameen. As-salatu salam ala rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Halim wa salim bikum. Salamu alaykum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Lil ikwani wa khwati fi din. Salamu alimani teba huda. Lil ikwani khwati fi Afrika, Europa, America, Caribbean wa kulli makan. And Anjarama as Jim, to my brothers and sisters in the Fulbe community, and salam to all my brothers and sisters everywhere you may be. This is a short notice. It's on Sunday. I know probably a lot of people in the West are looking at football, which I can understand. And I wanted to cover a topic and make a point about something that we lost sight of. Everybody knows what's going on in Jazeera, Arab, and Palestine today. We understand what's happening there. It's very fluid. A lot of information is given out. That's not what this show is about, per se. What we're talking about today, I want to make a point about something. You saw my marquee. If you know about the history of the Mau Mau, there was something else. And I want to show you that we had resistance in Africa as well against the same type of enemy. And I want to make a point about this issue, about the historical fact about this, because there's a lot of conjectures being thrown out. That's what has happened when the Mujahideen attacked the government of Israel and tried to attack them, and they took hostages and so forth and so on. We're not going to get into that, who was right, who was wrong. That's not what this show's about. We have scholars handling that as we speak right now. I don't need to get into that. But there's a lot of conjecture. Well, this is uncommon, and the enemy has a right to respond to what the Mujahideen had done. Well, let's get into that a little bit. I want to show you some pictures of some people in Kenya. The Mau Mau Rebellion was around the early part of 1950s, and they were finally stamped out by the late 1950s. And they were instrumental in helping to break up the colonial period, because these brothers and their kinfolk put a scare into the British. Now let's look into that for a little bit. When you are occupying a land and its people, and when that population decides to rebel against you, you have no rights to quote unquote self-defense that's been labeled there in Jazeera Arab today by the enemy. You're occupying this people's land. You've taken away their rights. Kenya, the colonial people who were the British Tubab, occupied Kenya. This resistant movement is similar to what happened in Palestine today. They removed the black farmers, took their land, and sent them to the highlands. They rebelled against them, and they weren't polite. And they put such a scare because they began to kill at will. When they found the Tubab, they began to kill them. Families, children, everybody. So we see a parallel in this to make a point, brothers and sisters. Something happens to the psyche of a human being when he is occupied against his will. And when they respond, they do not respond with politeness. And the occupier, in these cases, the Tubab, has no right to claim that he has a right for self-defense, because you are in his land, you took his land, that's his backyard, he's fighting to expel you. And you're not going to leave if he sits at the table to discuss anything with you, because you've been brutal against him. The same thing has happened in Palestine today. Now we look inside the United States. They brought over our ancestors to the Americas. When they rebelled against their masters, their colonial masters, their slave masters, any name you want to call them, they were not polite. Denmark Vesey was one. Nat Turner was the most famous. There were others. And they were not polite. They began to kill the Tubaab, to expel him, to stop him. Let's go a little further into this, into American history. You had the Black and Indian Wars. Don't misunderstand that. The Black and Indians were fighting against the Tubaab, against Andrew Jackson. This was almost 20, 25 years. It took that long for them to finally defeat the coalition between American Indians and African-American, freedmen who escaped slavery and so forth and so on. They fought Andrew Jackson and his government for 20 to 25 years. And they weren't polite. Let's look at it further. Down southern Florida, the Seminole and Black Wars. Many of you don't understand that. The Seminole, if you look, the Seminoles have mixed a lot with Black slaves and freed African slaves as well. And they got together and formed a coalition to fight again against the Tubaab, to drive him out, because they felt he was an occupier, he did not belong there, and they wanted to drive him out. And it took them years to finally defeat them. So I'm making a point, brothers and sisters, to say that when you look at the situation in Jazira Arab and you hear the Tubaab pundits, even some Black pundits, even African pundits, and so forth and so on, talking about the brutality of the Mujahideen group, the Black folk in particular should not talk, because he should look at the history of Africa and even there in the Americas. When the brothers decided to take on the Tubaab, he was not polite. The Mau Mau in Kenya was not polite. They began to kill at will because they wanted to expel the Tubaab bastards from their land, because they didn't belong there. It's not their homeland. Europe is their homeland. And the British expelled these brothers and their kinfolk from their farms and their natural homeland. So they rebelled against them and they began to kill them and their families. So you get the picture. Now, I'm going to get into another topic here. You see what's happening in Jazira Arab today. The same people who are making genocide, if you look at the history of the Jews there in this region, when they were occupied in ancient times, were they polite when they expelled the occupier? No. The occupier did not have no rights to self-defense because he's in the land of the occupied. So when these groups they defeated the Jewish army and they began to occupy certain areas, and they rebelled and fought back. And there's some historical movies talking about this issue. I don't need to get into that. But I want to make it a point to say to you that we are now witnessing a lot of resistance all over the place. Let's take it a step further. Let's look at the Sahel. You have my kinfolk, the Fulani, who have been grazing through West Africa. You've seen many maps I've shown in my classes talking about the Futafula people and what has happened and whatnot. Now they have had people come to drive them from it and to steal their cattle and livelihood. And they have not been polite in their response. This is a human nature. This is what humans do. And those who come to occupy, those who come to steal, those who come to ravish that particular person and his kinfolk, he has no right to self-defense. And this is what we're trying to say now to make a point is don't get the situation in Jazeera Arab confused. Don't think that the occupier has a right to self-defense. He does not. He does not belong in that region. So when he is making his the government of Israel is making their case before the public, I've seen black folk get on TV talking a lot of crazy stuff. And I'm going to prove something to you, especially to my black community in Africa and in the Caribbean and United States, because some of them are following the situation blindly because they said, I'm with Israel. I'm not here to tell you or me or any other person who they should side with. I'm not going to get into that. The Muslims have their rights. We have now our scholars are getting off their rear ends, and there's a number of fatwas given out talking about this issue. So, I let them speak because that's their job. But I wanted to make it clear to you is that when you get up there as a black man and you start to talk crazy, talking about how you are supporting Israel and you saying they have a right to defense, you better look back at your history. And you look at the occupier. When they occupied, and what did the black folk do? They fought, right? I've given you on the Mau Mau. There's others, but the Mau Mau was so bloody, and they frightened the British Empire so much that it started the period to decolonize Africa, because now there were resistance because what the Mau Mau had done, it started to have resistance. North Africa, the Amazigh, which is part of my heritage as well. The Amazigh in North Africa, especially in Morocco and in Algeria. It wasn't Algeria until the French and them split up the land. It was, Morocco. And then they split it up and called Algeria and Morocco. But you look at their resistance. How did they do? They resisted. And they were not kind when they resisted. And you look at the history here of Morocco, you look at their resistance. They were not kind. See, and the collaborators, when they caught them, they were not kind. So I want to get into another issue here, and then perhaps I'll start to close. Black folk, in particular, I'm not talking about the Tubab folks. I don't care about what their philosophy is. We know what it is because it's them who changed the wording of the Bible. We know that. We know the Tubab and their ancestors changed the meaning of the Bible, changed everything around. We know that. We know they took the segments out where they described the people as black and made it into other words. We know that as well. So they have their opinion. I'm not Tubab. So they can have their opinion. I'm talking about black folk. And when I see them get on TV, as I've been seeing Africans, African Americans, and even Caribbeans and those in Canada start talking crazy about how they support Israel. I'm going to get into that and tell you something that you should understand about those people that you are worshiping, those people who you are backing. Those people that you're backing now are not those who we're talking about in the Old Testament. And we have proof of that. I talked about this before. You, as a black man, you should get this book because it was written by our brother. Oh, that's it. I know this brother. I think he might have passed away here. I hope you can see it good. You all should get this book. I've talked about this many times. You should get this book. In there, he destroys the fallacy of the Jewish myth that the Jews were Tubab. Those that you are siding with in Israel today are European converts. Does it make a difference? Yeah and no, because it's no difference than than in the United States. You come to Islam. You're not part of the Sahaba and part of the family of the Prophet, but you adopted the religion. There's nothing wrong with that. Europeans were converted to Judaism. There's nothing wrong with that. But what has happened is that those who have been in power have assumed the identity of the real Hebrews and Jews. And this is the problem. And we have African Americans who don't understand the history behind this. And when I say to get on TV, they start talking this and that and so forth, because I understand in the United States the dynamics. You have two situations where you're not liked. You have the Arabs in America who generally don't like the black man, and we have the Jews who don't like either, even though we've had a long history in the United States of Jewish and black collaboration. We had that. We know that. They were part of the civil rights movement, and don't ever forget that. And some of them died. And so they collaborated. Then when the civil rights period began to wane, the Jews benefited from it, but we did not. See? So the black man is caught in between. He's not liked by either one, the Arabs or the Jews. In the United States, that is. So let's look at this. And again, this part of the resistance, because I want you to get you to understand. You say, well, I'm a devout Christian, I'm a devout Hebrew, and so forth and so on. I have to side with the people there. And then when you ask them questions, I said, what is driving you? Because he said, I go to the Old Testament, and this is what I read about the legacy of Judaism. And I almost laughed. I said, so you say those people that you're supporting today are those who are talked about in the Old Testament? No, they're not. When you pick up this book, I'll show it here again. Pick up this book. You can get it online. I understand now. Some brothers told me they did get it, and they said they were shocked at the information. You'd be surprised. If you ever notice something about Hebrew, Arabic, Ge'ez, and all these languages, they have this African type of phonetics to it. There's a reason for it, because the Africans were speaking it. That's why. And he broke it down in this book. You should get it. Every black person should get this book. This will help you to discern. Jewish scientists, here on page 184, I'm going to go through some, because I think it's important for all of us to understand history. You say you want to support the real Hebrews, that it's not them. That you're talking about the Old Testament is not them. They are European converts, and they adopted Judaism, of course, because they converted to Judaism, and they took over the language of Hebrew. The Jewish scientists were trying to uncover the origin of the Hebrews, the Jews. And naturally, because he himself was white, we're talking about here Professor Goldstein, because he's white, okay? No different than any European. And so he went to Europe to uncover this special gene that the Jews possess. So Professor Goldstein didn't find it. He could not find what is called the priestly gene. He says only 3 to 5% of modern Jews today that you support there in Jazirah Arab are real Hebrews. 3 to 5% of them. Professor Goldstein was then told by another person, by another Jewish scientist, and by an African scientist, he said that the real Jews came from Africa. They were actually ancient Egyptians and so forth. When that is bandied about, you hear anti-Semitism, you hear all this, you're racist against the Jews and all that. No, we're not. But we don't want to see history distorted either, because black folk always had their history. Someone's always taken something from us and made to be Tubab. So he began to look at I'm going to read some of this off. The Jewish priestly chromosome mutation. Goldstein found the DNA samples of males from the Lemba people of Southeast Africa. Goldstein found out that in this Lemba people, 9% of the men carried the unique priestly chromosome of Jewish priests, because the real Jewish priests actually had this chromosome. That's what they were going by, and they were black. So who are you supporting there, my black brothers and sisters, there in the United States and Africa and wherever you may be? You keep saying that you're supporting the Israel, because it's the same Israel that they talk about in the Bible. No, they're not, because Professor Goldstein, who's a Jew himself, denounced that and said they are not the real Jews. I'm giving you the proof here. It's his testing, not mine, not my dad's, not your father and your mother. No, by another Jew. He found that the priestly gene was among the Lemba people in Southeast Africa. And the Lemba clan, known as the Buba clan, 53% of the males carried the unique DNA signature of Jewish priests. They're black folk. Black folk. You remember when Solomon says in the Old Testament, in the first sentence, he says, what? I'm black and comely. Remember that? Huh? You remember that? And the Tubab came in about the 1500s and changed that around to mean dark and some other things. But if you look at the real Jewish, the Hebrew text, I've studied this for many years. It talks about him being black, and also Moses, alayhi salatu wasalam, also being black. And so we know now by Professor Goldstein, who's Jew, again, for those who come and, they want to understand it. He's a Jewish scientist, white. He didn't find the real Jewish priestly gene in Europe. He didn't find it in Asia. He didn't find it in the Americas. He didn't find it behind a rock. He didn't find it up in the sky. He didn't find it in the ocean. He found it among African people, among the Buba clan, which 53% of the males carried the unique DNA signature of Jewish priests. Professor Goldstein found out. He did his testing. So the DNA signature of the Ashkenazi population carried a higher incidence of the Jewish priestly DNA signature than the Ashkenazi population, and they are equal to the separate. I always have a hard time with that, but I won't get into technical things about the Jewish particular tribes. But within the Lemba people as a whole, the incidence of 9%, while it was only 3%, 3% to 5% among the entire Jewish population, we talk about today, had this gene. It could therefore be statistically, the Lemba people are the more Jewish than the Jewish people are today. This is what Professor Goldstein said. They have always been black. He goes on to talk about when they interviewed the Buba people, they said they left from the north, which we know as Messer, and then we know they're there in the region of we know as Jazeera Arab today, and they migrated back to the southern part of Africa. That's significant. Now you have to ask the question, how did they become white? Because the Romans were there for centuries upon centuries, and what do men do? They always mate the occupied woman. Bottom line, you know that. All history is no different. The man who's the conqueror, he always takes the advantage of the women who they conquer. And then plus, as the Europeans begin to come, then you know that would happen. And then when the European converts to Judaism begin to come to the region, then that made it even more white. But now when they've been tested, they found that the Jews, the modern Jews today, outside 5% of them are not the real original Jews that you said you support because they are part of the Old Testament. They're not. And I just proved that to you. And he goes on when he interviewed, he said, the story of the exodus of the Limba people into Africa has been researched and verified by Dr. Parfit, who's another Jewish scientist, okay, director of the Center for Jewish Studies, the School of Occidental and African Studies in London. He proved, again, verified by DNA that the Limba people left from the north. The Jews, they were Jews, black, left from the north and settled in the southeast region. And he verified this. Dr. Parfit has studied the Limba people for over a decade, and he went out to verify their story of origin. He found it in modern Yemen and also found it in a Yemeni part of Sahut, through which Limba people must have traveled to the southeast Africa. So if you look at a map, you see, Jazira Arab at the southern part of the tip of that is Yemen today. They were there. So now you have the proof of that. I'm trying to make a point to you, brothers and sisters, to say to you is this. You can support who you want. This is not an issue, but I'm not asking you to side with the Mujahideen and the Palestinians. I'm not asking that. I'm not telling you you can't support the Jews. I'm not telling you that either. I'm giving you a point to say that the resistance that you see today from the Mujahideen and from the Palestinian people are not new. All human beings who have occupied. Let's look at one thing, and it's on topic. How about Ireland and England? English had occupied Ireland, okay? And what happened? The Irish, when they rebelled to expel them, were they polite? No, they were not. Were they brutal? Yes, they were. Did they kill? Yes, they did. See, so this is what I'm talking about to give you an example that when you look at the situation there in Jazira Arab, don't misconstrue it. Don't sit there and think there's something new, because black folk did the same thing. But I'm also chiding black folk for not understanding the history, because you hear them many say, I'm siding with Israel because Israel is the ones who I know are in the Old Testament. No, they're not. Dr. Goldstein, who's Jewish, proved that they weren't. He was supported by Dr. Parfit, also a professor of genetics as well. So we know that the Jews that you support today are not those Jews talking about in the Old Testament. So you get that book that I showed you earlier here, and you go through this. He's got a lot of information about linguistic thing and so forth and so on. And he's Dr. Parfit also got the explaining about the biblical Exodus. The Ephraim people that left. Ephraim people, if you read this book, he's talking about the African people when they left. He said the Ephraim people left ancient Egypt, and they were important and conclusive confirmation that the Ephraim people that left ancient Egypt into the biblical Exodus later went to Europe to become the Jews and Hebrews were into the biblical, or original black people, the original black people. The Limba people are black. And the question are asking, how did these people become black when the Jewish people from who they probably originate look white? Remember, we talked about that. You say, well, I'm confused. How can these be people we see today look like Tubab American, European extract? He explains that. What is wrong with the question is that perceives the relationship between the Jewish people and the black tribes from which they originated from top down. Instead of perceiving it from the bottom up, that is from the black tribes to the Jewish tribes. So he's trying to get you to say, well, how did they become white? No, he wants you to understand how they were black. The original Jews, Hebrews that we understand were black, as we know now from the scientific DNA done by Jewish scientists, that they found that the Limba people and one particular tribe of the Limba people called the Buba people, okay, of the Limba, they're a smaller sect, 53% of the population, you heard what I read here, had this priestly Jewish gene. Netanyahu doesn't have that. If you look at Netanyahu's name and many of the Jews that you see today, because they became white after all of the amalgamation of the Europeans and Romans who came in this region. Our dear brother here, okay, Darkwa, Nana Darkwa, I think he's passed on from what I understand. Professor who wrote this book explained the Hebrew language and how the African people and how these names have been changed around by the Europeans. Netanyahu is an African name. It's part of the Ga language that you know today in Ghana. Very interesting, brothers and sisters. Very interesting. So there's a lot here, a lot of scientific thing here. But again, the main point I want you to say that you back a people because you feel that they are right. I don't want you to say you backing them because they are the biblical people that you read inside the Old Testament. This is wrong. This is a fallacy. If you say you want to back Israel because of whatever your situation is, okay, fine. But don't come and say, I'm backing the Israel people because they are those who originate, who are the original people who they're talking about in the Old Testament. That's a fallacy. I just proved that to you. And you're wrong in your fanaticism saying, well, I'm backing Israel because I have to back Israel because they are the ones, they're part of the heritage of Solomon, David, and Isa, alayhi salatu salam, Jamian, all of them, the prophets. They're not, brothers and sisters. I just proved that to you. They're European converts. And the Jewish scientists, again, prove them to be wrong. So when you go and talk and look at, even though they carry the names because they assume these names, Netanyahu is an African word. And it comes from the Ga language of Ghana. If anyone who's been to Ghana, I have been to Ghana, you look to the eastern part, they speak a dialect. I remember when I left Accra to come to go talk to my who became my teacher when I was there, and I spent some time there. He spoke a Ga language. And the brothers who came to accompany me there to the eastern part of Agazome there in Ghana, people who are familiar with Ghana knows what I'm talking about, they could not understand what my teacher was speaking when he was speaking in Ga language. Dr. Dakwa explains the names of the Jews that you see today, and it is very similar to that of Ga, the language Ga. So I'm giving you this information because I want you to be armed with it, because I want you to sit there and say things that is factual. If you say you support Israel, you support them because whatever your situation is. But don't say that you support them because they are the biblical people. They are not. And I just proved that to you here. And there's been other scientists who questioned this and then found out also, like Dr. Wade. Dr. Wade, Professor Wade also posed a central, because, this destroys the myth that, because the Tubab American, he sees himself into the Jews today. That's why he's dying support for them. If the Jews that we know today in Israel were black, I don't think the Congress and the Parliament and the Senate will be so forthcoming to support them. But they look at each other because they see a mirror of one another. So they both say, well, we are our brothers there in Israel are the descendants from what you see and what you read about in the Old Testament. I just proved that's a lie. It's not true. It's not true, brothers and sisters. Now, I don't want somebody to misunderstand me here. I'm not trying to say that the people in Israel are fraud. No, I'm not saying that, brothers and sisters. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm trying to explain to you is that the history here and their own Jewish scientists who were white, like you see today, no different than when you see Netanyahu, you see the Jews over there today, they look just like the Europeans and Americans. Okay, so That's why they have this connection, because they see a mirror of one another. But Dr. Goldstein, Professor Goldstein, proved this to be a fallacy, that they are not the descendants that are mentioned in the Old Testament. They're not. And so this is a very interesting thing. Dr. Goldstein, on page 185, when you get this book, he also makes other comments. There was a Los Angeles Times article. This is generated in the 1990s. So you can imagine how much, because Dr. almost lost, I think he did end up getting fired from the university after he published his book, because the Jews who were running the school were so upset with him, because they have now been exposed to a degree and told they weren't the real Jews. They were converts to it. They didn't like that. So they fired him. Dr. Goldstein also was talking about the article. He says, even the title of the New York Times article cited above shows the unquestionable and unverified influence of the Bible. Because when the people read the Bible, they read 140 versions of the Bible today, right? And everybody's been painted white. And his genetic study. And according to the title review, it is a tribal group of Africa that's been found to have Jewish roots, and not the roots of Jewish people that we have found in an African tribe. How can a black tribe in Africa have the roots of white Jewish people in Europe, if this tribe and the Jewish people were never related or supposed to have any context anywhere? Again, brothers and sisters, Dr. Goldstein and others proved this. When the Jews begin to make their resistance, okay, again, we go back to the resistance. They resisted. Now, there were some historical documents that Professor Dakwa said, proving that they weren't actually enslaved. But I'm not going to get into that for today. But the black Jewish tribes went into Europe and intermarried. And we know this could be the case because we have documents showing black folk in Ireland, England, in France, and other parts of Europe. These are old populations that were there. So we know this to be the case. And then whatever you say, well, how can it be? Well, how can this be? Because if you understand genetics, we have what's called genetic drift. Whence? Because the home center that Subhanahu wa ta'ala, with his wisdom, put the first man on this earth in Africa. He did not put them in Los Angeles, California. He didn't put them in Europe, because Europe was under ice and water. So he put the man first in Africa. When they begin to leave the African continent, they begin to change, because they were not under the intense African sun and climate. And we know this to be the case. So this is what happened. See, so when they went to Europe, they began to change, of course, okay, into changing from being black to lighter skinned, until eventually, over centuries and thousands of years, they became white. So I just wanted to get that historical thing to you, because I want you to understand that. And he also, Dr. Goldstein said, it is clear that the Limburg tribe in Africa did not originate from the modern white Jewish tribe in Europe, because the white Jewish tribes were converts again. So again, brothers and sisters, I wanted to make a point about that, because I want, and I'm not trying to criticize to agree, but I want us to be precise in what we believe, and we should understand the history. When we say we support a people, we should be understanding of that. And when we support a certain group of people, we should be understanding their history. And a situation that is volatile, as we see in Jazeera Arab, and black folk, especially when they get on TV to talk and they don't understand the historical significance of their conversation, to me, it's very troubling. And us as black folk, we don't have a good historical background at all. And we don't teach our children as well either. See? And this is why we make mistakes. We I told you here, I think 2 weeks ago, I think last time I talked, one, I think it was the Jewish, what they call them, the Jewish newspaper. I can't think. They showed African Americans coming over to fight for Israel. I think I told you about they were about 10 of them. There was, I think, 2 African American females. Interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. They came to fight for Israel. They're probably under the impression that they're fighting with the Israel today because the ones who they're fighting with are those, they're talking about the Old Testament. Dr. Goldstein again proved they're not of the Old Testament. They're Jewish converts. They don't possess the priestly gene that the original Jews had. And the Limba people possess this gene, and they're in Southeast Africa. Interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. So to make a point, brothers and sisters, that resistance is always a human factor. It is regardless of color. If you look at the Tubab settlers when they came and began to occupy America as we understand today, the Indians rebelled, didn't they? Were they polite? No, they were not. They did everything they could to expel the intruders, who they considered intruders, the Tubab Europeans. When the English colonized Ireland, they're both Tubab people. The Irish responded with brutality to drive the English out and from their occupation. In Kenya, in particular, the Mau Mau were expelled and their lands were taken, their cattle, their homeland, their farmlands was taken from them. Then they formed a secret society where they began to go and kill the British Tubab. And they weren't polite. They killed, they went to these farms and began to drive the British out. And they killed whoever was in their way. If it was a British woman, she was slain. See, so we know resistance. When people resist, they have a tendency not to be polite. So don't think what's happening out in Jazeera Arab today is unique. It is not unique. It's a human trait. And so anyway, I'll say one more thing here, and then I'll close with this. He's talking about the modern Jews that we have today. Dr. Goldstein said they're Jews and Hebrews talking about the black folk. These ancient black people from black African tribes are not black anymore. Talking about what you see today. They're not black anymore. Okay. And they are considered white in most European communities. Now, brothers and sisters, prove a point about something too. Have you ever noticed that, I don't know, you probably don't see too many of this. Have you noticed it's funny. You have a lot of modern day Jews that like African-American men. Oh yeah, African-American men go to they have no problems finding wives among the Jewish women. They don't. You look at their children. Look at the children of an African-American man and a modern Jewish woman. Look at their children. Now look at the children versus an African-American marrying a Tubab American girl whose descendants are Swedish, German, or English, or Irish, or Scottish, or Welsh, or something like this, right? Look at the children. You see a stark difference. And the Israeli woman, as we see her today, is white, right? But look at her children when she marries a black. They're not the same as the black man who marries a British American. We know the British came to the United States, and the French did as well. And we know the Germans, Swedish, and Norwegians, they came to Americans later. When they start to marry African Americans, you look at their children. Look at the children between an African American and a Jewish woman today. Stark difference. That should give you indication that they have mixed with the African blood, and the African blood is still in their system. See? So these are some facts I'm giving to you so that you have this discernment. And they claim that they wrote the theological documents that became the fundamental documents of the Christian Bible. Now we're talking about the Jews that we're talking about today claim they have done this. Yet they do not have any evidence in their history to prove this. Two fundamental questions anyone would have to answer is such as proof as how ancient Egyptian documents, this is a contention here, how ancient Egyptian documents became part of the biblical documents and how the authors of the Old Testament documents carried indigenous through transpose Akan and other African tribal names. Remember I told you, if you look at many of the Hebrew names that we understand, they're African. Many years ago, he's Rahimullah. He was a linguist. He explained a lot of that too. He found African languages were very similar all the way to Asia. The Japanese scientists came to Senegal to discuss with him, and they found that the Japanese language is originated from Africa. And it's true, because when you begin to learn Japanese, you'll see that. Because you'll see how the vowels go, and you listen to it. Yes, but the accent, of course, is hard. But when you begin to speak it, then you see Nakamori, okay, Japanese, Nakamori. Okay, you look at that, and you see they have the same type of syllables, linguistic, as many African languages. And so here, again, the ancient Egyptian documents. If you read the Book of the Dead, I've talked about this many times, you'll find many things, similar histories and stories you find in the Bible. Because we know Musa alayhi was trained as a priest. We know that. Well, he also received the revelation from Subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he gave them the laws. But we also know that in the Book of the Dead, there's many commandments, which we call the negative confessions, which there are 43, I believe, negative confessions. I should not kill, I should not steal, I should not fornicate, I should not covet my friend's wife. I forget, there's 43 of these things that a devout person at that time living in that era had to recite every single day. They said the Songs of Solomon was not actually written by Solomon alayhi salam. That's what they said. These are scientists, Jewish scientists have said this now. So I'm giving you this history lesson because, again, I wanted you to understand this history, because I want us to understand when we support something that we are historically correct in supporting that group of people and not follow something blindly. This is the point I'm trying to make, brothers and sisters. And we have too many Black folk who are following the situation in Jazeera Arab blindly, Muslims included. There come a time we'll talk about the Islamic part of what has happened in Jazeera Arab. Our scholars are discussing basic things now, giving fatwas, religious rulings about the situation in Jazeera Arab today. We know that. But we'll talk about other issues, inshallah ta'ala, about what happened in this situation. I'm giving you the part of this because I'm tired of seeing Black folk give the credit that they see of the modern Israel today and say, I'm following them because they're the biblical people that's in the Old Testament. They're not. And I've proven that today. But I want you to give that credence to what I've said to you, and also talked about the resistance. When you occupy a person, they're going to rebel. If the white folks from Torrance, California ran into Compton, where I was raised, and they tried to come here to occupy, the brothers would not be polite. They're going to try to expel the Tuba. And that's just human nature. See? So don't think there's something wrong when you see Mujahideen, what they had done. That's not out of character of the human being who's been occupied. They're usually, when they erupt, they're not polite, and they become just as brutal as their occupiers have been to them. So, brothers and sisters, I gave you this today in hopes of enlightening you. And for those who will probably see this in the near future, inshallah, if you like my talks, please subscribe to my channel. And I talk about a variety of issues, things that come up. I haven't been talking lately because of the things that has happened, and in Jazeera, Arab, and so forth and so on. And this is a topic that is very, very deep, and it's a class in itself, and it's very, very long. But I broke it down to give you the simple, basic premises of it. And again, I will show this book again, brothers and sisters. Anybody, you should get this, okay? Please get this book for your edification. It'll help you to gain knowledge and help you to understand how the integral part of the Bible is being black. And this here shows the evidence here about such a thing. And our dear brother who wrote this really showed out in this. He gave us a lot of good evidence and whatnot, and stuff like that. And he talks here about the issues. And I don't know if you know, in 1507, Jesus, as we understand, was black. Even if you look at the old pictures, and even Putin, can you believe this? President Putin of Russia talked about this because they're in possession of the originals, how they were told many centuries ago. Okay, he was black. There's paintings in Italy of Jesus alayhi salam. He was black. If you go to the caves of Turin in Rome, in southern part of Rome, you look in those caves. The early Christians hid in these caves so they wouldn't be killed, right? They depicted, because they came back from Jazeera Arab, as we understand, the Middle East, and they came back and they drew depictions of Isa alayhi salam. We know him in Arabic, and you know him as Jesus, Jesu, many different names. They drew him as black because they were there. So, and he covers issues here talking about these things and whatnot. And so it's a vital topic, and it's a topic that should be broached and understood. So I hope that I enlightened you, my brothers and sisters. I know this is long, but it's worth the time and energy to give you this, because this is important, because we have black folk. And if you now see black folk on TV talk about they support Israel because they're the descendants of the biblical people, you can refute them, and you should refute them. If they say they support Israel, fine. But if they turn around back and say, no, I'm supporting them because the people are those of the Old Testament, that's where you fight them for that, because it's wrong. See, and I gave you that evidence here today. Okay, brothers and sisters, until next time, and I hope that you stay safe and that you are doing well, and be careful out there, and guard yourself, especially brothers living in Europe and Americas, in particular Canada. The racism is getting out of hand, and so protect yourself and your families, but arm yourself with education as well, and your children. Give them our rich history, because we have rich history, and this book in particular, Dr. Dakwa, gave us rich history about the biblical black man, how he was the original owners of the Bible. It was him who were the original Jews. It was him who wrote the documents of the Bible. It's not the Europeans as they try to present it. So this book here gives you a good indication about our history. You should read this so you can get a better understanding. When you go and talk to people and you see all these what you call them, bishops and so forth and so on, talking crazy and everything like this, you can refute them, because there's a lot of that. I know when I was in the United States, I used to hear it. I could never understand why they talked the way they talked, but they did. And also, those who don the white Jesus Christ and you put it in your house is biblically incorrect. He was not a white man. He was a black man. So I just wanted to give you that. And brothers and sisters, until the next time, Assalamu alaikum. Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.